I think now what is most important, it's even not economy between our countries. I can't foresee a time, but it will be in far future, when trade between our countries becomes a really important component of our economic relations and your economic relations with the outside world. Though I would hope that we can make it quicker. But you know, I think that the first stage must be mainly political and psychological. We have to destroy the image of enemy.
Where would you begin?
I think we have shown already how you start. You start everywhere where you can. With treaties, I think you don't have a better instrument to do it as a, you know, disarmament, destruction of part of your arsenal, because we cannot fool each other. The weapons we build are mainly built against you, and the weapons you build are built mainly against us. So if we decrease it, then it shows also our political intentions. Then contacts, then real cooperation in regional conflicts. And I think, though it looks as if there is a confrontation, and there are differences in our position, but if you take into account the real national interest, I think we can not only find common ground in most of the regional conflicts now, but we can even cooperate here.
Georgi Arbatov is a principal advisor to General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev on relations between the Soviet Union and the United States. A member of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR, academician Arbatov founded the Institute for the Study of the USA and Canada in 1967 and has served since then as its director. He is also a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the USSR. Recorded in 1988, the answers given by Dr. Arbatov reflect new Soviet perspectives on peace and security. At the time, the Soviet Union had embarked on a series of both internal and external changes. Internally, the changes have been associated with policies of glasnost, perestroika, and a search for mechanisms of increased citizen participation in the shaping of government policy. Externally, the Soviet government has espoused a position that genuine security can be guaranteed not by the highest but by the lowest level of military balance, and that in the nuclear age there is no reasonable alternative to peaceful coexistence between states with different social systems. Quite obviously, history will be the judge of the durability, extent, and significance of the internal and external changes associated with new Soviet thinking and the policies of General Secretary Gorbachev. Today, academician Arbatov shares some new Soviet thinking and some of his central perspectives on the quest for peace. What dangers does America pose for the Soviet Union? Let's take them one at a time.
After a period of soberness, 70s, there was this internal urge in many Americans, in elite and also among the public, you know, to try to replay the history. It is because it looks to me that it was very difficult for Americans to come to terms with the fact that they lost their exceptional position in the world and have become a great power, very great power, maybe a superpower, but a usual power. And what I mean here was not only this exceptionalism, you know, which was born by Puritan minds when they founded this shining city on the hills, what looked to them, and Manifest Destiny as a foreign policy platform came out of it. It was illusionary exceptionalism. But there was also real exceptionalism. United States, as in difference to the other countries, including mine, did depend on the outside world for centuries, much less than all the other countries. And was also not invulnerable. All of us were vulnerable. The United States, behind two oceans, with weak neighbors, was invulnerable. And after Second World War, there was an absolutely exceptional exceptionalism. When America had military superiority, had monopoly on nuclear weapons, was in unique economic position, with destroyed competitors in Europe and Far East, with weakened Soviet Union, almost bled white. And it looked to many as if American century begins. And then in maybe in 60s, especially in late 60s, came, you know, the awakening to the facts of life, that America is vulnerable like other countries, that it is dependent also on others, and others are dependent on America, so there is certain interdependence. And for Americans it was not easy to come to terms with this new situation, new realities. And I think though they made some conclusion after Vietnam War and after the social unrest, economic difficulties, there was deep at their heart a wish to try again to return to it, because many understood it not as an exceptional situation, which is not very lasting in history, a page of history which is already overturned, but as something belonging to Americans by their birthright. And I think this was especially maybe, you know, brought to the surface by this humiliation by the Iran hostages, you know, in 1980. And there was an upsurge of jingoism in the United States. And Americans wanted to look fine again, to stand tall in the world, etc. And in this situation, Mr. Reagan comes, who promises them all of it. He says to him, if you won't feel fine, please. And they felt fine for a time. But then it turned out that they felt fine because they just forgot about some of the problems.
What are the central problems you see that America has to deal with as the 20th century draws to a close?
I think to understand that the world cannot adjust to America, America has to adjust to the world. It means not humiliation of America, but it means realism and understanding that it cannot gain back military superiority, it cannot manipulate other countries, it has to take into account interests of the other countries. All of us have to understand it. The age of empires has passed. And then I think we have actually also much more mutual interest with America now. You know, there was always a mutual interest in nuclear era to prevent nuclear war, of course. And I think both governments understand it very good, and the public understands in both countries. But now we see also another phenomena. I think it is everywhere in the world. It is the fact that internal problems and economic problems have become #1 priority in all countries, actually. Big and small, rich and poor, developed and underdeveloped. And in this sense, foreign policy has acquired as #1 task to create such external conditions which give you the best opportunity to mind your own business and to solve your own problems. And here is the second very important mutual interest of Soviet Union and the United States. We can just not let each other to mind our own business, but in other situations we can let the other do it, and maybe even, God knows, time will come when we can cooperate to facilitate each other and the rest of the world the solution of its real, not invented, but real problems.
What do you see to be the essential real problems of the world as the 20th century draws to a close?
You know, we have to understand that we have to part with age-old, even millennia-old traditions of international behavior. We cannot use by military force any problems bigger than Grenada or Falkland Islands. I think all countries have learned that. And then, you know, we have also learned that we are tremendously interdependent. We cannot have security on the cost of Americans or to the detriment of Americans. Neither can they have security on our cost or to the detriment of us. Then, you know, we are interdependent also in all other senses. Ecologically, you know, acid rains can form in one country and then other country will suffer. Ozone layers can be damaged and everybody will suffer from it. The rest, you know, this lungs of our planet, like oceans and tropical woods, can be annihilated and all of us will suffer. And you know what happens with the atmosphere, with water, etc., etc. And economically, you know, what is being done now? We are in a peculiar position. The major producers are developed countries, capitalist countries, Western countries, if you include Japan and some other Pacific countries in the West. And they are also the main consumers, because nobody else can afford it to buy their goods. And the ability to produce increases much quicker than the market which can pay. And you know, what are you doing with your allies? You are dividing, subdividing, dividing again the same limited market, which will sooner or later lead it to explosion of protectionism and some very serious economic problems. The real answer is to make the world market a real world market. This means to include developing countries, this means to solve the debt problem in some way, etc. And this means also to include the so-called East. It means Soviet Union and the Soviet Union's allies in international division of labor. So we have a lot of problems which have to be solved. You know, also the lot of developing countries. A part of them is prospering more or less, small part. But most of them, they are lagging behind more and more. And hunger is a reality. In this time in which we had these interviews, I think several hundred children have died from hunger in the world. And we cannot have stability in such situation. We have to do something. These are global problems which are more real than the threat of communist aggression, or I think also threat of consciously planned and made nuclear attack of the United States against Soviet Union.
You've drawn attention to a whole series of problems of global scope that the nation state as it has evolved has proven unable to deal with. In that context, what do you see to be the viable forms of cooperative global problem solving?
Well, you know, it's not yet time to speak for foreseeable future about world state, world government. I think the differences are too big and nobody would agree or win from it. And drive towards it will only raise a lot of other dangerous problems. But I think that international cooperation must increase, and the importance of international organization and international law. And among the international organizations, I think we have to rethink the role of United Nations and all organizations which were created under its umbrella. We don't have any better instrument. We complain often about them, but they cannot be better than combined policy of their members. And it was not they, it was we who acted very poorly. And we have to rethink it. We don't have any other better instrument for international cooperation, and hardly will acquire one. So we have really to attack this problem very serious, to rethink it, and to learn to live not by law of jungle, but by international law, and use more and more international organizations.
What are the limitations that need to be overcome for the world rule of law system to be a more viable means of conflict resolution?
You know, I think one of them is the scope of differences between different states. In this situation, it means to yield. Either you have to subjugate to Soviet socialist set of rules and government and society and constitution, or we have to subjugate to American or Western one. And this will create a lot, it has created already, even fears about it have created a lot of hostility and, you know, arms race, etc. And therefore, until this exists, it shouldn't be really tried upon. And also economic discrepancies, you know. You just cannot simply unite. You know, either the weak will die from it, will not survive the competition, or the rich will be so overburdened that they will collapse, and there will be tremendous opposition from their population. So you have to approach this problem in proper way, and I think we have a lot of room to improve the situation by just increasing cooperation, enhancing the importance of United Nations and other international organizations, and use it more actively even for peacekeeping problems.
I would like to ask you to turn your analysis from a global problem solving to what is possible in the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. As we enter the 5th decade of the post-World War II era, we have a legacy of some cooperation, a lot of tension. If you were to design the basis of a more viable relationship, where would you begin?
You know, one comment of mine would be that actually the system of relations between Soviet Union and United States, which somehow was formed, and I don't say now, in order not to be too controversial, whose fault it was. Or both sides had made their mistakes, but who was the main villain? I will avoid it better. But you know, it has come to a crisis. It has shown that, you know, Cold War type of relationship, confrontation, is very costly, has no end. You can go on for it for a long time, but without any results. And you cannot use, you accumulate more and more weapons, and you can use these weapons less and less. And the whole confrontation loses sense, because you can do nothing. What we know now better than we did know before is that the other guy will exist, whether we like it or not. And so we have to try. We cannot fly away to the moon from him. We have to live with him. It is a difficult recognition. of this fact. And if you look under this angle, you will see that maybe from 1955 there were attempts to make a fresh start, to look at the relationship differently. Why I choose 55? This was the first summit after the war, Geneva meeting. President Eisenhower and Khrushchev. And then it was tried again and again, but the old inertia of Cold War and suspicions and all of this, each time derailed the attempt. But we learned something from each attempt. And I hope that now we enter in a new phase of normalization of our relations with some additional experience and with better understanding of the rules of the game, of what one can do and cannot do, and of our real interests on both sides.
What are the rules of the game?
The rules of the game are that you cannot fool the other side. Honesty is the best policy here. And it must include that you recognize the right of the other side to live as it has chosen itself to live. You have to recognize that you have to live with it in one world, a world which has become very small, very fragile, is full of controversies, but is an entity, and we are in tremendous relations of interdependence.
Given this interdependence, what are the most viable areas for cooperation?
I think now what is most important, it's even not economy between our countries. I can't foresee a time, but it will be in far future, when trade between our countries becomes a really important component of our economic relations and your economic relations with the outside world. Though I would hope that we can make it quicker. But I think the first stage must be mainly political and psychological. We have to destroy the image of enemy.
Where would you begin?
I think we have shown already how you start. You start everywhere where you can. With treaties, I think you don't have a better instrument to do it as a, disarmament, destruction of part of your arsenal, because we cannot fool each other. The weapons we build are mainly built against you, and the weapons you build are built mainly against us. So if we decrease them, it shows also our political intentions. Then contacts, then real cooperation in regional conflicts. And I think, though it looks as if there is a confrontation, and there are differences in our position, but if you take into account the real national interest, I think we can not only find common ground in most of the regional conflicts now, but we can even cooperate here. I think Afghanistan, for instance, political solution in Afghanistan is in our interest, but it is also in American interest, because nothing breeds so much, Islamic fundamentalism, against which you are, as a holy war, and by fundamentalists, Islamic fundamentalists, this war is considered as being holy war. And then it destabilizes your ally Pakistan. It also is an opening channel of armaments which can land in the hands of terrorists, etc., etc. So there is a mutual interest. And it's also another part of the world, in Middle East, in Persian Gulf. We can cooperate there. We can find mutually acceptable solutions.
I would like you to take 3 areas you didn't touch upon that are potential sources of cooperative endeavor, and ask you to indicate what the obstacles are to working more cooperatively. The first would be an area where both your countrymen and mine are victims, namely the area of international terrorism.
Well, I think if we really are honest and don't consider don't divide terrorists into good terrorists and bad terrorists and call the good terrorists freedom fighters, then we can do a lot together. I think very strict rules, for instance, for hijacking. That you have to return them, and to try to press for an international agreement. That any hijacker, armed hijacker who hijacked a plane, has to be returned to the country against which he perpetrated. And the same for terrorists. We can exchange data on terrorists. We can work a lot. We are against terrorism.
What about the problem of nuclear proliferation in the world?
Our interests coincide absolutely. They are the same. Neither we nor you are interested in proliferation of nuclear weapons. But we have to draw a conclusion from it. And one of them is that until we go on with nuclear arms race, which violates, I think, Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we don't have a good case to try to persuade them, don't do your nuclear weapons. We have to show that we are ready to cut again our nuclear weapons. Then our case will become much more fundamental. Then we have to be very careful with, providing technology and material for anybody to build nuclear weapons. And I think you sometimes behaved not perfect, for instance, in Pakistan.
I would like to close by asking you to return to a theme that you introduced poignantly earlier in the interview, namely that while we are speaking, children are dying around the world from preventable illnesses. What do you see to be the blocks to cooperation in those areas of the world where that problem continues?
I think when we understand the real truth that these countries will be neither yours nor ours, and third world in general, it will be their own, and they will develop for their own sake. And our duty and also our interest is not to abstract it by imposing on them our conflicts, our arms race, which becomes their poor man's arms race. Don't use them in any confrontational way, but really, if we understand them as not as objects, but subjects of foreign policy, I think this will mean a lot of difference. Then we can really work out far-reaching plans and use for it part of the money which will become free due to arms control and disarmament, and then really help them help themselves.
Dr. Arbatov, thank you for sharing with us today your insights into the ways to a more peaceful world in the nuclear age.